everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm going to be telling you all about the books that I read in the latter half of February. There were only 3 of them, which is still a little bit below my average, certainly, but they were all really good reads, so that is really, really good because last wrap up for the first half of February, I had 2 good reads and then like 2 DNFs, and that was a huge bummer. But anyway, let's get into the books that I actually read in the latter half of the month. And also, this is my trusty cat iPod. She's been sitting in my lap for like most of my videos, and I always think that you guys can probably like hear her purring because she's so freaking loud. But then when I'm editing the video, her purr is like not audible at all on the video, so I don't know if you can hear her purring. That's, you know, it's because she's like right here. But anyway, so the first book that I read in the latter half of February, or rather the most recent book, sorry, not the first book, but it doesn't really make a difference because I'm talking about them all anyway. So The Thieves Daughter by Jeff Wheeler. This is the second book in the King Fountain series, and this is, you know, I don't think it was as good as the first one, but the first one was definitely a tough act to beat, so I didn't necessarily expect this one to be as good, but I definitely loved it. It definitely had not quite as good of political intrigue. It relied a lot more on like, let's fight these people and blah, whatever, a lot more, whereas I think the political intrigue was a lot more on point in the first book, but I still really liked this one. It also kind of threw me for a loop a little bit because this one takes place like 10 years after the events of the first book. So in the first book, the main character is like a child. He's like 7 or 8 or something. And in this one, he's in his late teens and he's like essentially an adult as far as this story kind of goes, and he's like a totally different character, and like a lot of the people we've gotten to know in the first book are totally different characters just because that much time has passed. So it's a little bit crazy and like weird, but I definitely really, really enjoyed this book a lot, and I definitely think if you're not reading this series, you should definitely get right on it because it is definitely worth like every page. It is so good. For that one, I read Knockin Magic, The Best of the Equinox Volume 1 by Aleister Crowley. I don't know why I necessarily like randomly wanted to read this. I basically went down a Wikipedia hole one day and just totally, this is where I ended up. So I ran to the library, checked out this book, all that stuff. So I am like a crazy person for just reading this book cover to cover. I did not really think that that's what I would be doing, but I did. So this is essentially, it's hard to describe, but essentially Aleister Crowley, if you're not familiar with him, was an occultist from like way back when. He was termed the wickedest man in the world, and he founded this whole religion and blah, blah, blah. So essentially this is like his thing about how to do his like magic system, etc., etc. And it's definitely like so purely informational that I didn't even give it an actual like star rating on Goodreads because there's not really a rating you can give something that's purely just dumping information at you. It's not any type of like you know, it's not your typical nonfiction book where it kind of addresses like different things or anything like that. It's just like, this is the information, here you go. So it's definitely like really, it was really, really good. I definitely really enjoyed reading it, and it was really interesting to me. And also like, I don't know if like you've been following this channel for that long, but so I'm pagan. I've mentioned it in a couple videos before. I don't talk about it a whole lot, but it is really interesting to me how much of the stuff that I follow and that people I know follow were influenced by this, and I didn't really like think about that before, that type of thing. So it's definitely really interesting, and I think that if you're interested in that sort of topic, this is definitely a good read, but again, totally purely an informational book, not something that I'd say like, oh my goodness, this is so profound, you should all read it, or anything like that. I would say that if you're interested in the subject matter, it is definitely worth it. And finally, the first book I read in the latter half of the month is Nightmare Arcanist by Shami Stovall. This was actually sent to me for review by the author quite some time ago, and I got it like right before I fell into that whole reading slump back in July, so I ended up not actually getting to it until now. And it has essentially been on my TBR like every freaking month practically. But I finally got to it. So this was such a good book. I could barely put it down. It's ridiculous how good it is. So essentially it's about this kid who's like 15 and he lives on this island where like everyone his age is like trying to become an arcanist, which is someone who bonds with a magical creature to kind of develop abilities, and they work with that magical creature to, I don't know, defeat pirates, prevent natural disasters, just whatever like good deeds kind of come with whatever abilities they kind of get from that magical creature. So he's thinking like, oh, I'm gonna, find a phoenix that'll bond with me, and then I can be like badass, and then no one's gonna like look at me like I'm a criminal just because my parents were, and bloody bloody. And he totally has an ego at the beginning of the book for sure, but it doesn't really make him an unlikable character, I don't think. I think it really actually kind of contributes to how good of a character he is, because you kind of think, like, you actually think that his ego is going to get him into so much more trouble than it actually does. And so the whole time I'm like, oh no, don't do that, dude. It's a bad idea. Just because you're like hella insecure doesn't mean you should like fall for that, blah, blah, blah. And I actually think that he's really gonna be that dumb and do it, and then he like doesn't, that type of thing. So it's definitely like really, really good that way. But essentially he ends up bonding with a creature called a nightmare, which is a suit of armor that's like just an empty suit of armor that's like made out of shadow and stuff. And so like a lot of that nightmare just kind of is like a shadow for like half the book pretty much, that like follows him around, all that stuff. So his abilities are like really crazy shadow related and like stuff and fear related stuff, and it's really interesting. So some of the magical creatures in this are kind of obvious, like, oh, a leviathan, a phoenix, whatever. And some of them are like really random things that are totally made up for this book that you wouldn't have like thought of at all. So it's definitely really interesting. And then also, so essentially he goes, once he becomes an arcanist, he goes to this like guild of arcanists to like train, and he's hoping to train with like his idol, who's like this hella badass arcanist who's done all this stuff. And it turns out like when he gets there, he's not training with that dude, he's training with somebody else. And then it turns out that that dude who he wanted to train with is a total asshole, and he's actually doing like all this horrible stuff, and he's totally not the person that the main character thought he was. And it's definitely just such a good book the whole way through. I really, really enjoyed it. I absolutely could not put this freaking book down. It's ridiculous, and I definitely highly recommend it. So those are the books that I read in the latter half of February. I'm definitely hoping to read some more books in March, obviously. You will see my TBR video coming up fairly soon. There are way more books that I'm probably not going to get to. But anyway, let me know if you've read any of these books, have any thoughts on them, etc., etc. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!